we're starting something, we associate our self-worth to the success of the company, right? That if the company does well, I am worthy. If the company fails, I am a failure. And I think one of the most important lessons I've learned is splitting those two things out. That you are a worthy person on your own, and the company is a separate entity on its own. And the success and the failure of the company is not me. And that compartmentalization has been able to just make a much healthier relationship with what it means to build a business for me.
Welcome to Very Beginning, a podcast where we shift the narrative from happy ending to exciting beginning. My name is Anastasia, and through conversations with inspiring entrepreneurs, athletes, influencers, and all-around trailblazers, I'm looking to explore how we can get more comfortable with change and find the courage to unlock that scary first chapter to something we've been wanting to do for far too long. New episodes will be live every Sunday. So without further ado, and so it begins. So Yash, let's take it from the very beginning. Welcome.
Thank you, Anastasia.
It's a pleasure to have you. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here today.
As I was kind of thinking how I'm going to introduce you to people that don't know you, and was doing a little bit of research on you and thinking about the things I know about you, one of the things that I wanted to put out there before even talking about any of your accomplishments is I think that you are just the warmest, kindest person ever. Every time we talk, I just have this, warm feeling and inspired feeling. So I think, when you introduce someone, they're so quick to talk about all the accomplishments. I just wanted to say that up front.
That is the best possible compliment and introduction you can give. And I really, really appreciate that, because that for me is what matters more than all the other stuff. So, wow, that was really kind. Thank you, Anastasia.
Of course. But very interestingly, you did start, your journey on a very traditional, I would say, career path, right? You went to an Ivy League school. You started a business actually while still in school, right? I believe in senior year, you started your own startup. So super impressive. But then you did something super unexpected, right? You quit because it just didn't feel right? And now you're on this journey, on this mindfulness journey, and you started another company, Kindred, that is all about connecting people and taking this community-based approach to life coaching. So can you just tell me a little bit more about this journey, how you, kind of went from this startup hustle, Ivy League corporate to now really following your heart and being on this mindfulness journey?
Let me tell you the short but ends up being a little bit long story on what brought me to where I am today. And for me, really, I think this whole journey started when I was in high school. So I was in high school in India, and I got into my dream school, which was at the University of Pennsylvania, at the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania. And I arrived on campus, and I'm like, I don't know what I want my life to look like, right? I'm 18 years old, and so I'm just like, okay, cool. I'm here. I got into this good school. I generally tried to do well in school, and now I'm here. So now what do I want my life to look like? And as I started to figure out, what does success mean to me? Because I think that was kind of the implicit question at the time. I started to see what I saw around me. And what I saw around me was success equals achievement, right? Success equals getting really good grades, getting an internship to McKinsey, converting the McKinsey offer into a full-time offer, making money, going to Harvard Business School for your MBA, graduating, and then eventually becoming a partner somewhere and making lots of money and happily ever after, right? That was it. I was like, this is the path.
This is the path.
And so then I was like, oh, okay, that's what I'm supposed to do. So I just started doing that. And I started doing that. And to your point, this is now 2015 when I was graduating. The thing to do then was to start a company. That was the really interesting, neat thing to do, right? And so I was like, okay, cool, let me start a tech company. And so start a company. I pretty much dropped out actually, but I still graduated, but we pretty much dropped out our senior year with one of my good buddies. And then we graduated and we did pretty well, right? We moved to San Francisco. We went through an accelerator called Combinator. We had raised money after that. This was it. And everyone was so happy, and everyone would be like, oh yeah, she's doing such interesting stuff. And my parents would share these news articles about me with all their friends. And that gave you this high, right? Like that gave me this high for a while. And eventually that stuff wore off. And it was like, well, why am I here? And what am I doing? And do I enjoy it? And the reality was I didn't. I was just like quite sad and frustrated and angry. And eventually had the courage and the support system to be able to say, you know what, like, it was really scary, but this is not going to be the rest of my life. And so I quit. And really, the last 5, 6, 7 years have been about understanding, well, who am I? Like, what do I even want? What's the life I want to build for myself? And how can I build that? How can I then have the courage to build that life, right? And that's taken me to a bunch of different places. And I moved to India again, back to New York. And I think most relevant is that's the journey through which I want to build Kindred Minds, right? That when I thought about what I want work to look like, I was like, well, how cool would it be to build something that can help me on my own journey of understanding myself and helping me move towards who I want to be? And what if I could build something that helps me and maybe helps others too? Because I know so many people are asking themselves these questions. And so that's the quick story of kind of how this non-linear path has brought me to where I am today.
Yeah, that's amazing. And honestly, I think what's so also interesting and inspiring about this, that I think many people go through this, right? Like on the kind of surface, being super successful, right? And people might be thinking like, oh my God, this person has everything, right? Because from the outside, everything always looks so much nicer and shinier. But I
Yeah.
think so often people then really lack, I guess, maybe the courage, maybe the, I don't know, kind of the drive to say like, this is not it. Like, I don't want to go down this path. And even the people that do, it might take them 10, 20, 30 years. So for you, I mean, it didn't take you that many years, right? You were still, I assume, in your 20s when you said, no, this is not it. I'm quitting. Was there something, but like, what exactly happened for you? Like, what
Mhm.
helped you take this step? Because I must have required a lot of courage, right? To really say, like, I'm stepping in this completely unknown, taking this new path and letting this one behind.
Yeah, what a wonderful question. Um, I think there were a few blessings, a couple of them in disguise, that helped me get to that place. One big blessing in disguise um, was that the company wasn't doing as well as we wanted, right? So we had raised a bunch of money and we were trying to grow the business, and it just wasn't scaling the way we wanted to. And I think the blessing in disguise there is that if the company just really took off and was growing really, really fast and you just keep going, I don't know if I would have had time to be like, hey, am I actually happy with this? Because I was just on autopilot. And so it's actually like things not going well that created this space for like, wait, what's going on here? And is this what I want? Um, and so I think that was really valuable and important, because I think without that space, I wouldn't have asked myself some of these questions. I think another piece was I started to tune in a little bit to my body, and I was finding that like I would stay in bed longer. I was taking longer showers. I was just like living life with less intention than I was used to. And so and my body was literally reacting to that, right? And so that was kind of the objective truth of like, hey, my body is responding to something here that like I'm trying to convince my mind, no, everything's okay, but clearly something's not, and my body's like actually telling me something's not right here. And I think the final and probably the most important piece on this path, Anastasia, was just like I had such a or I have such a great group of friends and family who were able to say, hey, something doesn't seem right here, right? That like, yeah, on the outside to the outside world, everything's going great, but like we know who you are, and something's not feeling right in how you're showing up for yourself. And I think like those three things together created this like mix where I was able to be like, okay, I owe it to myself to be like, what's going on here? And I'm really proud I did that, because I do to this day, I believe one of the hardest things is to be able to think independently and to really own your truths, right? And to be like, hey, I'm going to do this even in the face of all the traditional advice or thoughts about something.
I'm so glad you brought that up, that like that traditional stereotype, right? Like the traditional archetypes, because that's something I was also super curious to talk to you about, like how, when you kind of pivot away from, this path you're supposed to be on, right? And you come from, I guess, also a pretty traditional country with India also kind of, we
Mm-hmm.
always hear this joke that Indian parents say, well, you can become a doctor or a lawyer, right? Kind of
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
the two
Yep.
paths. So very
Yep.
similar also in
Yep.
other more
Yep.
conservative cultures. I had
Yep.
like a similar background. How was it for you when you kind of pivoted away and like left all this behind? Whether was there criticism you faced? You said you had a great like friend support group, but were there obstacles you had to overcome?
Yeah. It reminded me of this funny saying where like, and this article I read on this blog called Weak But Why, where we think that people care a lot more about us than they actually do. And people being like society in general, that like the thing was no one actually cared. When I quit, like the society that I was scared of, oh, I'm going to be judged and people are going to be, say I'm a failure and all this stuff. Like no one cared. They're like, oh, okay, cool. He stopped this like cool startup thing he was doing and now he's doing something else. And that was it, right? Like it was like one sentence and people move on. And so all that really matters is like me, what I want, and then how it affects the people who I really love, right? And so I think there's a lesson there of like caring less about what other people think. Even our investors, like I just don't think people cared as much as I thought they would. And so that was pretty unique.
I think that's such an important lesson because I think this can be applied to everything, right? That like we always overthink things, like always. And you always think about like, oh my God, how will people react? And at the end of the day, people are just like, good for you, right? Good luck.
Right,
So I think
exactly.
that is so funny
Exactly.
that you also had that experience. And what I also found really interesting, what you said, is kind of that even your body was giving you signals like, hey, something is not right. And I mean,
Mm-hmm.
you must have already been pretty self aware as a person to even notice it, because I think our bodies always communicate with us, but many people, they're not really in tune with it, right? They like get a headache and they just take a pill, they get
Mm-hmm.
acne and they just try to, put some cream on it. But so often it's actually our body almost screaming, right? Like, hey,
Mm-hmm.
it's not right what you're doing.
Yeah.
So for you, were you just always pretty in tune with that? Or was there something that helped you to start being really more in tune and listening to your body?
Yeah, I would say when this happened, I wasn't particularly in tune. I think these were like pretty big things that were happening, right? And my body acting differently, or like me wanting to eat like really unhealthy food all the time. Someone could see what I'm doing and be like, hey, there's something going on here. We should understand what's going on. Um, but over time, I feel like even for myself, I've gotten a much better understanding of my body in a much more micro sense, right? That when I wake up in the morning, I can kind of just check in and be like, hey, what's going on? And how am I reacting to things and what's happening here? And I think the most important tool for me in this has been mindfulness, right? That through a lot of, I focus mostly on like insight meditation or that modality around like Vipassana, through a lot of that meditation where you're really trying to create more awareness of the sensations of your body and what you're feeling and when you're feeling and how those sensations come and go. Through that, I've been able to just build a much more nuanced mindset around understanding my body and understanding what it's telling me about what's happening around me.
That's amazing. And did meditation come easy to you? Because I know it from myself, and I've heard it also from so many people that like, oh, am I supposed to just sit there, right? Like and meditate, because so often your mind wanders off, right?
Yeah.
And like I mean, I'm dabbing into it. Have not mastered it, but sometimes
Yeah.
I even find myself like getting more anxious because I'm just like, why is this not working? Why, you like
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
get wound up and your thoughts wander
Totally.
off and you become like more anxious. Did it come easy to you, or do you have like any tips
No.
and tricks for someone that wants
Yeah.
to start, meditating?
Yeah. Well, I'll share this because I think I have an interesting relationship with meditation. And I think most people usually have one of two relationships with meditation. The first relationship that I think we hear a lot of when you hear about like Headspace and Calm and some of these bigger companies is using meditation to help relieve stress or improve sleep or improve focus. And it's like, hey, how do I learn meditation as a tool to solve for these other things that are happening in my life? And I think that's really valid. And that's like how my journey with meditation started, where it definitely didn't come easy, but it was just like, okay, I'm going to meditate for 5 minutes a day or 10 minutes a day. And I'm just really going to try and stick with that habit. And some of these apps do a great job with that. But it always felt like I had to do something when I was like in that relationship of meditation. Then after actually I quit the startup, for whatever reason, I felt called to try out this 10-day meditation retreat. It's called a Vipassana retreat, and it's a 10-day silent meditation retreat. You like go to one of their centers. Their centers are all over the world. It's become really big now. And for 10 days, you give up your phone and you just meditate every day for about 11 hours a day. And you don't talk to anyone. You don't engage with any materials or any phone or any technology. And you just learn this practice. And I think more importantly, you just relinquish control and you go really deep into meditation. And what happened to me during that experience was my relationship to mindfulness and meditation totally shifted. It went from meditation to help relieve stress to meditation and spirituality as a way of being. That there is something deeper and deeply human about tuning into ourselves and into our bodies and seeing what's happening here. And so since that has happened, I'm still getting all these benefits that come with the focus and the stress relief. But for me, meditation has become a way of life, that it is a deep part of my purpose. And so I less view meditation as, oh, this is something I would like to do, and more, this is just part of who I want to be, and I want to integrate into my life. And that doesn't mean...
That's amazing.
Yeah, that doesn't mean it doesn't fall off a bunch, right? Like there are many days where like I forget to meditate, or on weekends I don't like to meditate. I like to just like have it be more open and spacious. But with that intention, with that motivation, whether I meditate 10 minutes or 30 minutes or an hour or 2 hours in a day, it doesn't really matter, because it's driven by this like deeper purpose and just knowing, hey, this is what I need to integrate into my life in a more meaningful way. So
yeah. No, that's amazing. And I think so interesting with what you said, that, not seeing meditation almost like another task to tick off. Because in our society, right, we're so used to these to-do lists, right? And like taking things off and really becoming like meditation, tick. But like that's so counterproductive, right? Because this is like literally not what it's supposed to do, give you more stress.
And I mean, my wife tells me about this all the time, where she's just like, how can we create space for fun for the sake of fun, rather than it being, or like rest for the sake of rest, rather than it being like, oh, I need to rest, so I tick that box off, so I'm ready to go the next day, and like being like this high performing beast. Instead, like, why can't I just have fun? Because that's what it means to be human, And I think there's something really special about that.
It sounds like really you also relearned how to sometimes press pause, right? Or like stand still, like with your first company, right? Saying like, nope, pressing the brake, that's not it. Or, like with your body not feeling in tune, like how do we, pivot, and how do we go somewhere else? So really those like pressing pause moments, I think, are so difficult sometimes to accomplish and so rare. So that's such a good skill to acquire, to really be able to do that.
Yeah, and I feel really grateful for it, right? Like those were the inflection points of my life. And I think being able to create space and intention for asking myself, and reflection, and that's kind of what we're doing a lot with Kindred Minds, right? It's like just helping bring more intention to be like, hey, is this what you really want? And are you living in line with those goals, right? And I will say, right, Anastasia, that I also have a deep appreciation and honor for that energy too, the like to-do list, go get them energy, right? That it's not like, oh, this is all wrong and this is all right. It's just like, hey, there's a happier balance here of how do those two things work together in a kinder, more productive way.
And I think that's a great point. Like, it's really not one or the other, right? It's not like either you're like a hustling, successful entrepreneur with a to-do list, or you're a mindful yogi, right? Like only meditating the whole day. Like, it's really not one or the other. And I think that goes to a whole bigger conversation about just society being pretty comfortable with putting us in the boxes, right? And being kind of, oh, he's like that yogi guy, like always wanting to do these boxes. So that's a really great point, that you can be both, and that's totally fine to be both.
Yeah, but for me, that's the goal, to be able to harness both in a productive way.
And I think that's a perfect segue, because that's what you're doing, right? You founded another company now, Kindred Minds, where you're really trying to do both, where you are, again, a great entrepreneur starting a company, but being on this mindfulness journey. So what I wanted to ask you about starting yet again another company,
Mhm.
were you afraid, kind of having had that experience of burning out and kind of all of that that comes with that this might happen again, or did something feel different now with founding Kindred
Mhm.
Minds?
Yeah, great question. It took me a while to process the kind of scar tissue from the first company. It was just like such an intense experience that I think there was like a desire of like, I just need to slow things down for a few years, right? When it comes to like work and the intensity. And I think that just created more space to like process what happened and what I learned and what what I took away from that experience. And I was like, I do really love to build things and to create things. And so one is like I like to do that. Two is like I have a skill set around doing that. And three is like if I can build purpose around it, that's like matching all these three pieces that I'm trying to incorporate into my life, right? Because again, honoring the I'm good at it part, which is like helps financially, helps me like actually achieve a bunch of stuff. Like I think that's an energy that needs to be honored here. And so yeah, when I came back to starting, it was just how do I take those lessons? How have I processed them? And say, well, now how do I want to do this differently? And I think I had just given it enough time. It's like a long-term relationship, right? That like you break it off and it's like, hey, it takes time to be able to say, hey, what really happened there? And what did I take away from that? And so I think with that, I was fresh enough where it was like it had been 3 or 4 years, and I was like, this is how I want to do it differently. This is what I learned. This is what I saw. This is how I want to build things differently. And I think my entire relationship to being a founder looks completely different with Kindred Minds. It just feels fundamentally different, and there've been such big changes that we've made or I've made in how I approach building the company. I think for me, the biggest win with Kindred Minds so far, beyond the work that we're doing on a personal level, is like I found a relationship to work that feels deeply positive and long term, right? That like I do enjoy most days being like, okay, I'm excited to take on the problems of the day. Like they're not always going to be fun, but like I'm excited to like lean into this and be like, how do I figure out all these things that we need to for the business?
Before we dive into it, I just thought it was so interesting that you said really, almost starting a business is almost like a relationship, right? Like and going through a breakup. Because I
Mm-hmm.
think oftentimes, like when you think about people starting businesses, it's like, oh, you start and you succeed and you become Elon Musk, right? Or you start
Mm-hmm.
and you fail and then, I don't know, you go back into the corporate world. But you don't see the narrative so often that, like, I mean, you hear people starting again and again, but it's kind of right. It's not the success stories being told. It's really kind of those one-hit wonders, right? That are always like really
Mm-hmm.
portrayed in the media. So I think it's interesting that you said, like, right, it's almost like a breakup. Yes, you had a relationship and it didn't work, and there's scar tissue, there's hurt. You have to process it, and when you're ready, you can like
Mm-hmm.
get back on the horse, right? And this it doesn't mean you were bad at it or you're not meant to be an entrepreneur. It just meant maybe the time wasn't right or maybe the company wasn't right. But I think that's
Yeah.
such a valuable lesson, especially for people really feeling this urge to start something on their own. Like it's fine to try again, and you don't have to be a one-hit wonder.
Yeah, totally. And I think the deeper piece here, and this is one of the big lessons I've learned with the second company, is so many of us, when we're starting something, we associate our self worth to the success of the company, right? That if the company does well, I am worthy. If the company fails, I am a failure. And I think one of the most important lessons I've learned is splitting those two things out. That you are a worthy person on your own, and the company is a separate entity on its own. And that when I see my role in the context of the company is this plant or this small tree, and I today am the gardener for that tree, right? That I need to get it its soil, I need to give it the sun, I need to give it its water. But I'm a separate entity. I'm not the tree. The tree is the tree, and I am the gardener for the tree. And one day the tree is going to grow or not grow, or whatever the case is, and I'm going to grow on my own. And those two things are separate. And one day I will no longer be the gardener for the tree, or one day the tree will no longer exist and I will go to garden other trees, right? And so being able to split out that I am not the company and the success and the failure of the company is not me, and that compartmentalization has been able to just make a much healthier relationship with what it means to build a business for me.
That's such a beautiful analogy. I mean, I said it up front. You are a very inspirational person. So let's talk about your tree then. I gave a
Sure.
little bit of an intro, but can you just tell a little bit more about Kindred Minds and what the whole kind of idea and purpose behind it is?
Yeah, I mean, it's so deeply related to all the conversations we've been having, right? But it's what we're building is a new, better, more affordable approach to traditional one-on-one life coaching, and it's really focused on using community and the power of community and people to help us live our best lives. And to put it simply, it's this idea of like what I would love people to go through the membership and to graduate or to evolve with is helping people get a better understanding of who they are, right? So when you're going through your own startup experience, you're just like, well, who am I and what do I want out of this? And then helping people get a better understanding of, well, where do you actually want to go, right? Like, what are your values? What do you hold to be true? And what's the life that you actually want to build here? And then, cool, let's create the space for those, and then let's help you actually go from point A to point B, right? Like, let's integrate the actual accountability, the like changes in your day to day, implementing different habits to help you go from point A to point B. And the way we're doing it is we bring together these groups of 8 to 12 people with a peer led facilitator. And then every other week, they come together for an hour and a half and they focus on a specific topic and they connect with one another. I think that's so important. We're like creating this space for this deeper connection that like we don't have in normal conversations, right? So they're connecting with one another and they're learning and growing as individuals together, right? And then in between sessions, we have these we have such an amazing roster of experts, right? Coaches and learning experts that we're working with to design the actual materials that people are processing and learning and going through actual activities and reflections and sharing that with their friends. And then they come back to the session to process what's going on there and share their stories with their cohort mates. So yeah, that's what we're doing.
Yeah, I mean, going through the program now myself, I'm what now on week 3 or 4, I believe, right?
Four,
I
yeah, I
I
think that's session
at
four, yeah.
4, yeah. I remember when you reached out about like if I want to join and kind of experience myself. Like, of course, my first intuition was yes, because I think we're
Mm-hmm.
very similar in the way that our values. So I was already like thinking that this might be the right fit, but I did have a little bit of hesitation when you said like, well, it's kind of a group and community focus, right?
Mm,
Like approach to life coaching. Because when you think about like life coaching, like, ooh, there will be like pain points discussed, like,
mm,
really trigger points might come out. You might have to
mm,
open up. And I think it's already pretty hard on itself to do that to one person. But when there's a whole group, and even if it's a small group, it's like, ooh, I mean, I
yep,
still took the plunge and I'm so, so happy I did because I told you, I don't
yep.
think I would have been doing this right now if I didn't. But that was really like a
It's not bad.
hesitation I had. But I believe in the very first session, that hesitation was completely removed when, we had this like breakout with I think 3 people. And
Mm,
each of us were there because we like wanted to focus on a few different things, but all of us were sharing the same issues, kind of the same like what is holding us back. And I was
mhm.
like, oh my god, this is insane. Like us three are in completely different countries, in different continents, and then it really
Yep.
clicked for me like this makes total sense that this group and community helps each other. So I think that is
Yep.
such a beautiful concept.
Oh, well, first of all, I'm so glad. I'm so glad that you were able to go through this experience and to be able to see, oh, okay, like how is it coming up for you? And how are you resolving some of the hesitations that you had going into it and seeing that's working for you? I think that's really cool. And I think, you know, we've been working on versions of Kindred Minds for the last year and a half now. And the piece I keep coming back to is this element around shared experience, that like as human beings we might be going through all the craziest things in the craziest different places and like it seems totally different, but when you actually can dial into it, like we are all the same and there's so many pieces here that are just common in all of our stories to each other's stories, right? And so in this world we have so much noise, right? When you think about social media and you think about the news, there's just like so much of this anxious noise and this like surface level conversation that's happening, that my hope really is if we can create space where people can just like take that mask off and feel safe and just go a little bit deeper and be like, this is what I'm feeling and this is what's going on for me, we'll learn that we're actually all deeply connected and that we're all working towards the same thing and we can all help each other on that path.
Absolutely. No, that's beautiful. And I mean, you just said taking masks off. Like, I think masks are such a, I mean, I guess defense mechanism, a natural thing, right, that all of us do. But on the other hand, like such a horrible thing. Like, I wish we could just be like, learn in kindergarten or primary school, like, hey, don't start putting
Mm-hmm.
on these masks. Like, that's something I always struggled with. So I think that is,
Yeah,
so important to always realize like you do not need masks or to, like play
totally.
different people to be
Totally.
successful in this
Yeah.
world.
I think it comes full circle with all these other pieces we're talking about, right? About not caring so much about what other people think and about really leading in with authenticity when you start building a company. Like, yeah, I think it's just like important to be able to be and bring your truest, most honest self to whatever you can do. And I think that's actually like the formula that best sets us up as individuals for success in our own lives.
For sure. But I'm sure like now that you embarked on this journey and you also started posting, I've noticed way more on LinkedIn, right? And very like personal things. Like I think the other day I saw something where you posted, actually I don't read books regularly, where I thought like, oh, that's a bit like a contradiction to kind of, the person I know you are and the way I see you and like what you're building. So
Mm-hmm.
that's interesting. And I want to kind of learn more about how, like, why did you start doing it? And were you afraid of like kind of, right, like again, what will people say, how will people perceive it, will this maybe harm my company, like how was that
Mm.
process for you?
It was scary to start, right? I think there was a rational decision of why I wanted to start posting. So I've been writing for a pretty long time, and I've been writing on Substack, and I've kept that to like a very small group of friends and family. Like I never wanted to write for other people, but mostly for myself, and to just like push myself to think more structurally and put it down on paper and then put ideas out into the world. But I kept that circle really small. And then I think at some point we were just like, well, how do we build trust with prospective members, right? People who are learning more about Kindred Minds and what we're doing and what we're working on. And we thought, well, how neat would it be if we can just take this thing that I'm already doing and start sharing it with a wider audience, right? That this already feels really true and deep. And this is one of the really cool things about like work and personal and emotional and spiritual all being in the same direction for me, which means that the stuff I'm doing in my personal life is applicable to the things in my work life, and the things I'm doing in my work life are applicable to the things in my personal life, right? And so we were like, well, can we take this thing that I'm doing anyways for myself and share it with a broader audience, and what does that look like, right? And so that was really the inspiration: is can we build trust with members, and can I take what I'm already doing and share it with more people? And so we did that, but there was definitely fear, right? That as much as I'm talking about like, hey, let's not care about what other people think, and this is not like a binary journey. It's not like you're there or you're not. It's like you're working on that spectrum and you're going back and forth a bunch on the spectrum, and then you keep trying to inch forward. And the hope is like over time, hopefully I'm getting better, but like I'm definitely not going to ever be fully there. And so that's also what makes this fun. But there was a lot of fear. And the first post, I was really looking on like how many people liked me and how many people loved it and how many impressions did we get and what happened. And I think I just like in a meta way wrote about that. And I was like, well, this is the journey I'm now going through. And I want to lead with vulnerability and authenticity. And I think that resonated with a bunch of people, and a bunch of people commented and being like, yeah, I can totally understand that. And so now, honestly, I think I've reached a point where it's just like, yeah, I just put stuff out and I don't think so much about it. Like many times I'll post on LinkedIn, I'll forget to check for like 2 or 3 days. And I'm like, oh, okay, people are engaging, or hey, there seems to be some interest here. And so um, I think like reframing the relationship in that way, and also acknowledging like, hey, there's some fear, there's vulnerability, but I'm also working to be better. Like that's been the journey of my life. And that in this micro way has been the journey of posting online as well.
And I think that's the beauty of social media, right? Because I mean, there's so much criticism about it, and so much of it is also correct, right? No matter if it's LinkedIn, Instagram, there is some pretty toxic stuff out there, 100%. But it can also be good, right? And it can also really serve you. So, for instance, for me on Instagram, I recently just kind of went through everyone that I followed and just like unfollowed content and people where I know like this
Mm,
wasn't serving me, like people that maybe were posting, kind of with filters or, any kind of models. So I'm just like, this is not
mm,
serving me, right? Like this is not giving me any any joy. This is not inspiring me. Like, why should I be following those
Yeah,
people? And I think in the same way, like the way you said it, you are not posting now to get likes, or you don't even care about it. It's just more really like a creative outlet for you, right? And I think that's when it
hmm,
becomes so powerful, when people can really use it, right, to create something great and create, again, community. When you send out something
totally.
great, you'll receive back something great, but that it's not for the purpose of clicks, likes, comments. I could imagine in the moment when you stopped caring, will I receive likes, comments, shares, then you probably started receiving them, right? Because so often that's how it works in life.
Yeah, I think there's definitely an inverse relationship. But I'll also share, right? Like, this is where it's tough. And I think this is one of the themes we're touching on, which is like life is not one way or another. It's not like this is right, that's wrong. Because, right, like even with my LinkedIn writing, it is driven by a business decision, which is to get more content out into the world. And so, yeah, I'm not associating that much about with likes, but like over a long period of time, we do need to be able to justify that like people are resonating with this content or it's reaching a lot of people. And the way the algorithms work is like when someone likes it, it shares it with more people, right? So likes do matter in some way. It's just like, how do we define our relationship to it? And that relationship can be super toxic, or that relationship can be like, hey, this is a reality. This is something we're solving for. But we can just approach it in a way that feels productive and healthy. And again, separating out the self worth, right? That like my writing is also not me in deciding whether I'm a success or failure. Like 20 likes or 50 likes or 1,000 likes does not make me a success or a failure, right? And so being able to like reframe that relationship, I feel like is just so important.
Yeah, 100%. And you just mentioned that, yes, in some way you are building a business, so you are dependent, right, on also like people getting the word out and growing it. So I'm curious, have you also received any negative comments about like, well, you are monetizing, right, kind of life coaching, right? So almost like those pain points that people have, because it could, right, it could kind of, for some people, cause
Mm-hmm.
some, raise some eyebrows about like, well, is it taking advantage of it? Like, was there some negative
Mm-hmm.
resonance when you started?
Yeah, I think we've like heard from a few people where it's like, why would I pay for this when I can do this with my friends? Or like, why is this better than coaching when I already have a coach? I don't need this. Like, I think we've heard arguments of different kinds. And I think my general take on that is if you feel like you have it and you feel like there's that space for it, then great. Like, do that. Maybe we're not the right fit for you at this time. And also, like, we live in a world, or we live in a society, at least in the US, that's defined by capitalism. And that's the prevailing economic structure, which is that there's an exchange of money for value. And so when I think about like the amount of like time and people and expertise that we're trying to build into the course, that requires resources. And we are not funded as a nonprofit, or we don't have like, hey, we can build those and then expect nothing in return. We are building a business, right? And so part of building a business is honoring, well, there are financial responsibilities of building a business, right? That making sure we like pay the people who work with us, making sure we pay all the experts who put in their time and effort into building it out, making sure we can like support the operations of running this thing. And so I'm not afraid to own the fact that we're building a business, and I'm also willing to own the fact that like we're putting a lot of time, thought, and intentionality into this experience. It is being constructed very intentionally to be able to help people in these specific ways. And so I think the reception to that, when I can talk to somebody, has been fairly positive, right? Especially in the West, where people are willing to talk about their mental health. They are willing to spend money and time and other resources to be able to prioritize that. I think we're trying to build something that helps enable more of that.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I think that's also like not even being afraid to face that criticism, right? Heads on. Sometimes it's even good to hear those opinions and those voices, right? And because
Yeah,
no feedback is probably the worst feedback, right? Because that's what helps
yeah,
you grow. And so probably it also
yeah,
can help to get the negative comments.
totally, totally. Even today, right? Like when people are filling out, they fill out feedback forms after every session, and some people are like, "Oh, I didn't like this," or "I liked this." I honestly, it excites me rather than feeling, "Oh no, this is like, what do I do? They didn't like this." It's like, "Oh no, like people are talking about the same kind of thing that they're looking for. Like, let's go and build that." Right? Like that's like I am looking for that because that actually gives me a north star of, okay, this is what I want to build to improve the business, right? And so, yeah, in terms of criticism. I appreciate it.
It just really resonated with me what I said earlier about the gardener and the tree, because that's where it comes in, right? If
Yeah,
someone criticizes your tree, it doesn't mean you're right like a crappy gardener. Not at all. Like, don't
right,
take it personal. It's just like,
right,
yeah, your
right,
tree can be even
right.
better, right? Like, so use this other tool in your
Yep.
little gardener toolkit.
Yeah, I think that analogy works exactly right, right? Like just again, separating those two things out. I'm not a bad person because this session didn't go well, right? Which is like, I know it sounds crazy when you say it out loud, like why would you ever think that? But that is the internal narrative that is happening for a lot of us.
Yeah, 100%. Well, Yash, before we wrap up, I have a little segment I do with every guest called the Final Three.
Sure.
So it's three
Okay.
short questions, and you can reply to them in as long or as in short amount of time as you wish, but they're kind of meant to be those little three quick takeaways. So my first final question is, what was the one thing that really helped you to go from this idea of founding Kindred Minds to really actually doing it, to taking that first step?
It was getting something out into the world. We can make as many pitch decks and ideas and write as much of that stuff, strategize as much as we want. But what made it real was the first session we ever ran with people. When people were like, I'm going to pay money, I'm going to show up to this like Zoom conference during COVID with 20 people, and I'm going to see what I get out of it. Like when that session happened, that's when it all became real.
That's amazing. Okay, second final question. What was your biggest fear when you started Kindred Minds? And most importantly, did it come true?
It was like, will anyone care about this? Really, that was the fear, right? Like, do I have any idea about what I'm talking about? And did it come true? Yeah, it partly came true, which was like, people were like, oh yeah, like this is interesting, but like not for me. A lot of people were like that. But again, to the point on the gardener and to criticism, it was like, well, instead of saying, oh, I'm like in trouble and I need to like shut everything down and this isn't worth anything. No, where can I listen to like what people actually want here and what they're criticizing and what they're looking for? And then how can I follow that to build a better tree? And it just takes time. Like, I think we expect like, oh, we're going to push this thing out. We're going to have this big launch and everything works. And it's like, no, if there's anything I learned is like, you have to launch with like a crappy version 1 and you see how people react. And then you see, oh, is this like what they're saying? Or is this what they're looking for? Okay, now let me make like a 10% improvement. Oh, okay, this is still not working. Let me make another 10% improvement. And then it just over time, those like small steps, right? Those like small seeds that you're planting, that then helps build an experience that you think is an overnight success, but has been like 7 years in the making.
Amazing. All right, and final question. And we talked about learning so much, so maybe let's try to pick the one. But the last question is really, what was your greatest learning since you embarked on this mindfulness journey?
Having the courage to listen and live with my own truths. I think that's been the biggest learning. Have the courage to really understand what is it that I want, and then to actually be able to do that, and to not care about what the broader society thinks and how I'm supposed to do things, but to really be able to lean into, this is who I am and this is how I want to build my life, even if no one else understands it.
Amazing. Nothing to add. What? Like right
But
on
deep
it.
there. Yeah.
No, but
Yeah.
amazing. I mean, thank you,
Yeah.
Yash. That was so beautiful. As I said, I always feel so inspired. So I hope whoever ends up listening to it will feel the same warm, fuzzy feeling that I have now.
Yeah. Oh, thank you, Anastasia. Your questions were wonderful, and thank you for inviting me to reflect into my own experiences in a deeper, more meaningful way.
Of course. Well, thank you so much. Have a wonderful rest of your evening.
All right. Take care, Anastasia. Bye.